Welcome back to Studio Wesley Annex, the audiovisual podcast where we break down the lectionary text of the week. I'm your host, Sam Sells-Williams, and I'm joined by so many lovely people today. We are doing our first ever in-person live episode, and this is also our Christmas Advent holiday episode. So it's a good time. I'm joined by a lot of people, so we're going to do fast intros. I want to hear one word of a response of how you slept last night, and I'm specifically going to start with Josh, because Josh, you're the reason I'm doing this question as our intro. Josh, do you care to explain?
The one word I'd have to use is great. Yeah, Eliot, what do you have to say?
My sleep was great, other than the fact that my pinky toes were off of my bed. I think Sam has a similar.
Yeah. I get to use more than one word because Josh got the bigger bed.
Jealous.
Yeah. So we were. We picked a number and we lost. Yeah. Derrick, how did you sleep last night?
Beautifully.
If I only get one word, I'd have to say squeaky. I was on, Allison's agreeing with me. I was on the top bunk of a fully metal bunk bed. If I moved literally at all, not only would the whole thing shake, but it would emit crazy squeak noises. So, needless to say, I did not move at all for the whole night. Lovely.
So as you can tell, this episode's different for a couple of reasons. Obviously, we're in person. This is Derrick. This is your first episode on in
I think
2 seasons.
It's probably been a minute. Nobody's missed me, so
we all wanted you on this episode.
Thank you
for this moment.
Thank
We
you.
also, I was going to say this next. We have multiple angles today, so we might be pointing to any different version of it. And Allison's in the back. Allison's giving a little wave that you guys can't see, and if you're listening to this, you really can't see it. But Eliot, you want to start this weird episode with a prayer?
Yes. Let's bow our heads. Dear Lord, thank you that all of us are here together, finally, being able to discuss the texts all together. That is a blessing in itself. I ask that you help us to learn something new, help the listeners to hopefully learn something new, and further our understanding. Amen.
Amen. And then the one other special thing about this episode is that because of we have so many people and it's our holiday episode, we're going to start with a Christmas Eve text. And then after that, we're going to go into our full Christmas text. So we're going to start Christmas Eve. Tess, are you ready? You're starting us in the past. You set this whole episode up.
I am ready. I am doing a gospel text today, which is a little crazy. I am doing Luke chapter 2 verses 1 through 20, which is classic Christmas, y'all. Classic Christmas. It is quite literally the birth of Jesus. And I think we've all heard this story before. All the usual things are still true. He's laid in a manger, an animal trough. He wasn't born in a palace. The angels appear to shepherds, not kings or rulers. We're told that Jesus will rule with love, not war or might. He's for all people. So I'm going to skip all of that and instead talk about how kind of unrealistic this story probably is for one reason. If we look at verse 18 says, so we're talking about the shepherds, right? Angels come down, scare them, tell them not to be afraid, even though they should be afraid. They go into the city, or they go and verify what they were told, and then they go in and tell all the people what they saw, right? And verse 18, and all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. No questions asked. They're like, oh, cool, baby was born in a manger. Like, yeah, that makes sense. So it's seemingly pretty insignificant. People across different translations were either amazed or impressed or wondered. But when you really think about the historical context here, I don't think this is that accurate, because shepherds were considered poor, illiterate. Apparently, they were considered dishonorable because they were not home at night to protect their women. We're going to skip over that. Debatable. They were considered thieves because they grazed their flocks on other people's properties. And overall, they were just outcasts of polite society. So when you think about them going into a city, proclaiming what they just saw, that already sounds a little weird, right? Like, born in a manger, all these things. And people are just like, oh my gosh, that's so great. That's so great. I totally trust the words coming out of your mouth, Mr. Dishonorable Thief. Like, that's great. Totally get it. And so I think a lot can be said for the fact that God chose these shepherds to be the first to announce the good news. He didn't choose, a king to announce it. He chose shepherds who may not have been trusted at all. But I do kind of question whether or not the all who heard it would believe. Like, is that part real? Did that actually happen? So that's one thought I have, is that kind of questioning of whether or not people would actually believe them. And then, and I was talking to Sam about this earlier, and I just have to note this, y'all, because it's kind of impressive. Verses 6 and 7, it's talking about Mary, and it goes, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn. Period. End of story. No meds. I don't know where Joseph was. No doctor. Mary just popped out a kid on her own. And that kind of, in my opinion, makes Mary a badass. And we're going to leave it at that.
So I guess how this is supposed to work is that I'm going to be commenting on all of your reflections. Am I understand correctly? Okay. So I want to appreciate, I always appreciate y'all's reflections, actually. But I want to appreciate what you just laid down. I don't know if I've ever heard a profile like that on the shepherds. I've always heard about sort of the working class dynamic of the shepherds, and that they were probably tired, but I've never heard sort of they might be a bit sketch profile, so one of the things that I appreciate about Luke's telling of the nativity, it's one of the most expansive ones. And part of the reason it's expansive is how many different types of characters he includes in his telling of the story. And so it makes me wonder if he made a choice. He chose to go with characters and inclusion of characters over how realistic does it sound, or how believable does it sound. And because I do think just writing in general, you're going to make choices, and you know that you're not going to please all the people all the time. So, and again, we're talking a first century AD writer here, but creatives are creatives. And so I just wonder if he's actively making a choice that he wants to show the many different types of people that God is including in the story of God giving God's self to the world. And then we get it gets all so interesting that he chooses shepherds, right? Like that, and that God chooses shepherds, that Luke decides to include shepherds in this story. All of that to me is just, wow, Luke's going to also choose magi, right? Like later on, which is, again, like, you can include these guys. Like, there's many different profiles of the magi, the wise men, outside of the fact that they're not actually observing a Judaism that would be respectable by most Jews, right? At least in first century AD. So anyway, I just find it fascinating that the profile you bore out and the ways that it speaks to the choices that Luke made, possibly by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, right? In writing this part of his gospel. So
I think I appreciate the profile, the socio-historical context of it. And I like that you put the authorship lens on it, because I think you talked about the choice that was made, but it brings me to, like, why was the choice made? And I think it's interesting that this story that you hear every single year includes so many people, like the rest of the gospel talks about what the kingdom of heaven looks like, and doesn't discriminate by socio-historical context, doesn't look at class, doesn't look at how they were deemed by society. They are just included because that is what Jesus's gospel is. The rest of it is going to be about. I think this is like the setup, obviously, for the rest of that. This is what is to come for the rest of the gospel. So we're going to keep on going with our a super interesting episode, and we're going to move on. Josh, are you ready to talk about your text?
Yes.
I know how excited you are for this specific text.
Yes. So I have Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. And just real quick, I really want to talk about like Hebrews. It's one of my favorite books of the Bible because it's a letter, but it's more of like a sermon. It's super easy to read. It's not directed at one church, but it gives this very general approach, and it uses a lot of words that are easy for me to understand. And so Hebrews isn't really trying to prove God's existence. It kind of just takes it and it breaks it down in a way that it just explains it in more of, it just takes it for what it is and explains it more. So the first thing that I really like about it is start off the bat in verse 2, it talks about the final days. It says, in the final days, though he spoke to us through a son, God made his son the heir of everything and created the world through him. And it talks about, I know this is a Christmas episode, but for me, when I read this and I was reading some other commentaries, it's really talking about the final days of judgment. It's not talking about Jesus was crucified and how it talks about how he was more than a prophet, but it talks about how on the final days of judgment, he is going to be the one to judge you. It's going to be kind of this thing of God and him, but it's really also going to be Jesus. So I thought that was kind of interesting how it highlights his Jesus relationship to us. There's kind of a double meaning there. And then later on, what I really like is it talks about the angels and it breaks down the angels and breaks down the relationship. And because I think that's a very complex thing the Bible doesn't really talk about a lot. It kind of talks about the meaning of the angels. You know, they are God's creation, but there's a certain distinction to be made between us and the angels. And it talks, I just want to read verse 14. It talks about, says, all the angels are ministering spirits who are sent to serve those who are going to inherit salvation. So I just think that's so interesting that that God has made the angels and the same people that are serving Jesus are also serving us. I just think that's such a powerful thing that God has given us. What else did I write down? The other thing that I really want to highlight is it talks about how Jesus is the ultimate messenger, but he is also, he has delivered God's message, but at the same time, in his life on earth, he was the message ultimately. He wasn't just referring to God. He was relaying a lot of what God had to say, but while in his time on earth, he's coming up with his own message on his own. He had something to say that he took a lot of the Old Testament and made us sure that we were reading it in the right way, and it challenged a lot of our beliefs. So yeah, I know this is a Christmas episode. I know there's a super sudden shift from the passage Tess was going to, but this kind of talks a lot more about Jesus's life, and it breaks it down in a way of how it makes sure that we're understanding it in the ways that we should. So I like this because it's one of the first sermons that we're really listening to, that we get to see in the Bible, and that we can kind of use this as a guideline and how to read the gospel. So, Derrick.
I love Hebrews for so many reasons. One, I do believe a woman wrote it. That's a conversation for another Annex recording for sure. One of the things I love about the entire sermon of Hebrews, or the entire sermon to the Hebrews, is that the preacher keeps coming back to Jesus. So as you're reading the whole sermon, all of the chapters, 13 of them, you'll see what she's doing. She keeps bringing up these different images that mostly are familiar with people who have a history and understanding of Judaism, a history and understanding of Hebrew worship. And she keeps trying to bring all of those images back to Jesus. And so even the angel sections, like, yes, we have this understanding of angels and how angels work in God's plan and take care of God's people, but they are not greater than Jesus. And she keeps wanting to bring, and this is why I think the lectionary text wants this passage of Hebrews as a part of our conversation on Christmas Day, because even now, there's a way that we can think about our observance of Christmas, whether it be the gift situation or the parties or even the family, the goodwill to all men, the peace on earth, all of that. And the Hebrew preacher is like, yes, yes, yes. And let's bring it back to Jesus. Let's keep bringing it back to Jesus, because for her, it's going to be the most important component of this whole message, that all of this keeps coming back to Jesus. And I appreciate her for that. It makes for a powerful, powerful sermon. And if you read all the way to chapter 13, the way that she even talks about, I mean, you talk about judgment. She then is going to talk about coming to the mountain of God that cannot be touched. But this is a kingdom that cannot be shaken. And just as we think about Jesus being born, and this goes back to your passage, Tess. Like, you think about this king being born in a manger, the fragility and vulnerability of this king being born, but this king is the king of a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and that juxtaposition of how Jesus comes into the world, but the kind of world he's trying to build, the kind of community that he's gathering. There's something so powerful about that. So thank you, Hebrews preacher, for bringing it back to Jesus. I think that's a beautiful thing for us to do, particularly as we celebrate Christmas.
I am going to use a very interesting analogy here. It's a football analogy.
Come on.
I know nothing.
Come on.
Okay, well,
I'll grade it.
about to educate it. Okay.
All
right, great,
I'll grade this
great.
analogy.
Okay, so a quarterback throws a football to his wide receiver, who catches the ball. But when the quarterback throws the wide receiver the ball, he puts it in a place that only he can catch it. And I feel like God meets us in a place where only we know that is where he's at. And I feel like during this Christmas time, in this Christmas season, God has, at least for me, in being in this space especially, has been put in a place where it really has touched me in a way. And I think that God tries to find those places that really hit us importantly and hits us in our spots that we personally feel. It was a funny analogy, but I hope that made sense.
That
Yeah.
made sense. God meets
I
us.
even kind of understood it.
Great.
Wide receivers.
Oh my gosh, guys. I found my segue for my thing, Eliot. Okay. It's actually not even that much of a segue, but you're talking about like how things are personal to you and like how God touches you in a way that nobody else would understand. So I was reading through my verse, guys, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is just something that I feel like I have been struggling with. So my verse is Isaiah 52 verses 7 to 10. And it's honestly really pretty. I felt like, of course, my annotations I was saying are like a child. Like I feel like I write like no big words at all, no big thoughts here, but I'm gonna put it together in a nice way. So it starts out talking about the mountains, about spreading the gospel, how it's bringing peace to the land. People are breaking out in joyful song. It's very lovely depiction. And I feel like it could have been summed up in maybe 5 words, as I do with most things that I read in the Bible. But then I was thinking about it, and recently, shout out to my therapist, shout out to Esther, love you, babe. We were talking about how my whole life I have been told that I'm like super dramatic by a lot of different people in my life. And, you know, maybe I was, because I was a very dramatic child. But I was talking to Esther about it, and I was like, Esther, I feel like I can't even tell a story anymore without checking myself and being like, am I too much? Like, is this too much? Like, I don't know. And she was like, well, why is dramatic a negative connotation for you? Because honestly, it's not positive or negative. Like, not every word exists in a binary of good or bad, like on one side. Like, it can be in between or defined differently. And so she was like, yeah, you're really dramatic, but I love it. And I was like, okay, well, first of all, don't call me that, but thank you so much for saying that to me. So I was just reading through it again, sort of like through that lens. And then I was able to kind of see the purpose in being so descriptive, because obviously not everybody's going to get the same impact of 5 words as I probably would, because I'm not a very, like, we've said this before, but I don't like reading lots of things. Like, it doesn't sink in the same way as other methods of learning things do. So then I read through it and I circled all the words that I thought were dramatic. And there were a lot. There was the first word I was shout and sing. So not one or the other, both. Okay. Then we have they're breaking into joyful song. They're not just singing. His holy power, eyes of all the nations. And then I circled victory. And so I just think it's really interesting that whenever we are talking about God and painting this picture, it's like they just went into a thesaurus and they picked all the most dramatic words they could and they put it in there. And I kind of love it. Like they eat with that every time because everybody loves that. Everybody eats it up. And so I don't know. I think that it's made me appreciate storytelling a little more, especially around the holidays, because I feel like we tell a lot of the same stories over and over and over, and they kind of start to lose their luster. So coming back to it with that lens of drama and more of a storytelling, impactful, personalized way for people to find their own impactful things or find their own piece of something that means something to them. I feel like that's made me appreciate this story more, as well as some of the other ones you guys have been talking about. Because I get kind of jaded when I hear the same stories over and over again, as anybody does. So, yes, that is all I have to say about that.
Okay, that was brilliant, and I love.
Wasn't it a good segue?
It was a really good segue, and I just
Vendela
really
saw it and took it.
Yeah.
She's like, I don't care if anyone has anything to say.
I love that. It's the appropriate term. Ooh, I just hit the microphone. Sorry, Michael. It's the appropriate term. You ate that? Is that an appropriate
Boots down.
word?
Why I
ate
wanted
that
Derrick on a
shit.
podcast.
Okay.
You ate.
You ate. You ate. Okay.
You ate with that.
You ate with that.
Yeah.
I'm never gonna use these terms
This is beautiful.
ever. Okay, so you
Wait, can I get one clip of you saying, say,
Can you look
everybody
straight
be
in the
quiet?
camera?
Can you?
you ate that? Is that what I'm
No,
saying?
you ate with that.
You ate with that.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so as you started, I was like, "Wait, what is the text?" And I had to pull up my phone and
I kind of go all over the place.
No, good. No, I was like, wait, I thought I knew, but let me make sure that. And the text starts with how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of a messenger who proclaims peace, who brings good news, who proclaims salvation, who says to Zion, "Your God rules." So a couple of things I just want to connect here. Isaiah is seeing something that won't be seen if we're reading this as a prophecy, which not everybody's going to read this as a prophecy. But if we're reading it as a prophecy, Isaiah is seeing something that won't really be seen till maybe 700 years later. And who are these people proclaiming on mountains? They might be shepherds. And so Isaiah is seeing possibly beautiful shepherds, right? Or others who are proclaiming the story. But Isaiah could also be seeing a beautiful preacher. Isaiah could be seeing this beautiful preacher, bringing it back. So I named that because I think the connection that it drew for me, Vendela, as you were talking about the ways that I resonate with, I literally think that I'm way too much even, this is the part that gets edited out because I'm too bright, too much. It's interesting though to imagine that someone could have seen us from a distance and said that's actually beautiful, like that. And so it's interesting, Vendela, just as you're even going through the way that you process through the text and personally processing through the text, and to think that what you're at first glance way too much, but at second glance this is good stuff here. And I think that this is in some respects what Isaiah is trying to help us do, is to look at these scenes, particularly of the lectionary text, and just ask the question, have we looked at that well enough? That actually could be beautiful. That actually could, that person bringing that message, because here's the other side of it, that person's actually disruptive. If you're this person who's proclaiming peace, you're proclaiming peace probably at a time that people aren't feeling it, aren't seeing it. And so Isaiah is like, how beautiful is this person out? He actually says, how beautiful are the feet. And I just don't think that's just no. So let's just say how beautiful this person is who's preaching peace at a moment that none of us feel it, who's bringing good news at a time that none of us feel like we have good news, or he could even hold good news. Like, so I do feel like Isaiah is actually doing what you just did. Let's look at this again. Let's see what else is there. Let's look at these words again, because there might be something really beautiful about something that feels disruptive or feels like it's too much. It just feels like it's out of place. And can I just say, Christmas is so out of place.
Yeah.
Like Christmas, the celebration of Christmas, the days off that we have to take because nobody's going to work from the 23rd through the 26th at least. That's the boss talking there. Like, there's a way that I look at it, right? Like, Isaiah comes along and is like, actually, Derrick, that might be beautiful. That might actually be something that causes us to break out into singing. Let's look at that again.
I like to call Christmas time a beautiful chaos because so much is going on. Some of those things are emotional. Some of those things are spiritual. Some of those things could even be like financial, for example, buying presents for people. So with all the craziness that's going on, I think for me at least, like learning and not even learning, but having the thought in my brain of finding peace throughout like day to day. And it's not easy. Like, I'm not saying like it's an easy thing to do, but just having that thought, like that mindset, that lens of looking through like the time makes it a lot easier for me. So yeah.
First of all, shameless plug, if you haven't watched our Advent Reel series, I did in fact do one about peace. Go light that candle with me. But I'm actually going to shift away from peace to joy. I don't remember who talked about joy. But if you... Shameless plug for Vendela too. Go light a candle with her. But in verse 9, I love the juxtaposition of burst into songs of joy together, you ruins of Jerusalem. So like bringing the ruins to all of a sudden burst into songs of joy. And yes, the word burst is quite dramatic. Yeah. But I not only see like peace in the holiday season and how kind of weirdly placed in the year it is, but even looking at it through like a college age lens, just like the number of things that are going on, from daylight savings. I don't know if anybody else, like seasonal depression hit hard this year when that went through. Finals week, like having to go home and deal with your family, which is harder for some people than others. Just like there's so much going on, but in the midst of all that, you're expected to watch silly little Christmas movies and bake cookies and go Christmas caroling and look at Christmas lights and yeah, spend time with your family. But I feel like that's the same juxtaposition of like you ruins of Jerusalem. You're at the end of a semester. For some of us, it hit us a little harder than others. But at the same time, you're expected to listen to Christmas music, even if you don't really feel like it. And so, I don't know, like, I'm not saying that that's good or bad. It's just kind of something that I'm recognizing as a, like, oh, we're not the first people to feel like that. Like, this has happened before. And if you keep reading verse 9, literally the next line is, for the Lord has comforted his people. Like, yeah.
Oh, that's good.
And this conversation we're having about like this reorientation towards beauty, I think is really important, but specifically, I'll get back to what you said, but the key of what you just said at the end, I have a thing. You said, yeah, you talked about politics and I got excited, but at the end, what you were just talking about of like us not seeing it, but it's still happening now. And like, that's one of my favorite books of all time talks about that and talks about like the world. I'm allowed to say this on the podcast now. The world is shit right now, but it's been shit before and we've gotten through it. And it's because of this. It's because of that, like, we have seen Jerusalem fall, and yet joy still burst forward. And we still got to that. And so right now, where every moment that you're living in feels like the worst moment possible, and it will get to the best moment possible, and that's the life part of it. And so I really like that we're all circling around this. I am going to, before we segue out of this, you said something about politics, and I was like, well, now I have to say it. Because the thing is, you talked about this radical leader who's speaking peace in a time. It was about politics. I'm in it. About somebody speaking peace in a time without peace, and orienting that towards beauty, because that person would have been killed.
Yeah.
And that person is still not seen as beautiful all the time. Yeah. And you said it, but I wanted to say it again before we went to break. But this is our transition to break.
Oh, no.
Keep going.
Because then I have to say, that is why it's prophetic. It is prophetic to see that person and to call them beautiful, because that is not the commentary on the ground right now. It is in the spirit of Advent to see the person proclaiming peace and good news in a time where it doesn't exist, and to say amen. That is in the spirit of Advent. That is an expectation that can only be fulfilled by the coming of the one, like capital O1. Okay, I won't say anymore.
You have something. I see it.
I was just gonna say that when we're talking about like standards of like things that are beautiful or like easy to digest, or like things that we like, people that are quiet are not typically the ones that can create the kind of change that creates that joy or that rebound from really difficult times. So I don't know if you can hear me with this, but there we go.
Speaking of being quiet, I actually fully agree with you, but today I'm feeling something, and I'm going to push you on that too. Okay, push me on. Because if we're talking about reorientating towards beauty, that's also Mary. Because Mary, yes, does proclaim the good news, but also Mary was a quiet person from a town that nobody thought anybody was going to go from. And yet she was the one. So like even that idea to change that and look at it as beautiful, somebody from a place that nobody would have seen, somebody who had no power in her time period and who wouldn't have been allowed to say anything, and seeing that even as beautiful. Like, I think it's a yes and situation. Like, yes, that is something that does not make change. And yet in this text, it does. And so I think both are true. I don't know. I want to Mary kick. But now that we're going to break, I did want to say like that. I say it like every episode, but like this is why I love doing Annex, is because like going from you saying 5 adjectives, and I was like, yeah, I understand the text now, because of how you interpreted it. And then you going on this theological monologue, and then I was like, oh, I also understand the text. And then Tess talking about like Christmas music and the realness of being like all of these are the text, and all of these are only possible because of us. So I'm really happy to have this episode. I hope you guys are enjoying listening to it, and we'll be back in a little bit.
What's up, guys? My name's Eliot, and I'm a part of the Studio Wesley intern program. And today's Advent candle lighting is the one of the Jesus candle. So I have here a white candle to represent Jesus. So let me just light it real quick. So the first thing I think of when I think of the Jesus candle is the color. In stark contrast to the previous 4 candles, this one is a very bright, shining white. Some would say blinding light. Several times throughout the Bible, actually, mention of blinding light has been made. Just how in Luke 2, where, quote, an angel of the Lord appeared in radiant splendor before them, lighting up the field with the blazing glory of God, and the shepherds were terrified. But what I also find interesting is that God says that he will lead the blind to see. For me, at least, it can be really hard to see something that literally terrifies people. However, what if this terrifying and blinding light is needed to impact people? There was another shining light mentioned in the story of Jesus. that was the Star of Bethlehem. But this time, this blinding light led people to Jesus. So I would like to invite and challenge you this Christmas season to just be the shining light for someone. Lead someone closer to Jesus. Be there for people. Make an impact just like the light of Jesus did.
And we're back. We just had a discussion about Eliot's socks. So if you guys are watching the visual podcast, you guys get a little pink furry treat. Eliot, are you ready to talk about your text?
Great intro. Okay. So I had Psalm 98. It's a very basic psalm of praise. There's obviously, we know there's different kinds of psalms. We have psalms of thanksgiving, psalms of lament, wisdom psalms, psalms of remembrance. This is what I believe is a psalm of praise. It starts off by remembering God's faithfulness to Israel. That's how it begins. And then in the middle of the psalm, it talks about the Lord announces his victory. And then it ends by basically saying, how great is the Lord, praises to the Lord, and all of that. Well, I will try to relate this to the Christmas season. When it talks about remembering God's faithfulness to Israel, I would like to think during this Christmas time, it is easy to get caught up in the things that we are doing. And all of the we talked about the beautiful chaos that goes on during this time. And maybe it's good to take time to remember God's faithfulness to us and maybe put a reset on our faithfulness to him. I don't know what that means. That may mean different things for different people. But it's just a thought that I would challenge us to think about. I think that's all I have. I'd love to hear what everyone...
I can't stand you because you say that you have nothing to say and then say one really profound thing, and then I'm like, damn. So you get to respond to this.
I will. I'm gonna take a different angle, but that you actually helped me get to, but it won't be exactly what you said, because I do think that there is something about the letting this be a moment, a season, a time of year that we reflect on God's faithfulness and therefore what is our response. And I think about the ways that, so some people know that before I was ever doing campus ministry or church leadership, I was a worship leader. And that was sort of the primary thing that I did, singing and leading worship in church. And I heard a sermon from Graham Kendrick, who's a Brit. I don't even know what he's doing now, but he was a smashing Brit, yes. And he talked about how Jesus is the ultimate worship leader. Jesus is literally inviting all of creation to worship God. And doing that in a way, like if you had envisioned what even a contemporary worship leader does now, through song, invites everyone in a sense to sort of stand, whether it be, in body or spirit, and to literally sing a song to God as an offering of thanksgiving. And Graham Kendrick was trying to say, like, Jesus is the ultimate worship leader, inviting all of creation to come forward, to draw near to the God that created everything, and to do what Psalm 98 is inviting us to do. And it is almost like Christmas is like the first song in the set list. Like, Jesus is born into the world. Okay, let's all sing. It's like the beginning of the set if you're thinking about contemporary worship. And so I think about the ways that literally what Psalm 98 is doing is sort of bringing everybody in. So verse 7, let the sea and everything in it roar. Let the world and all its inhabitants too. Let all the rivers clap their hands. Let the mountains rejoice out loud all together. And so I think the question that you asked, Eliot, is beautiful. Like, we reflect on God's faithfulness, and how are we being faithful? And it's like, are we joining the song? Are we joining the song? And this is what's really beautiful to me, joining the song that Jesus is leading. Jesus is leading a very specific type of song. But we're all invited to it. And it doesn't matter how well you sing, therefore it doesn't matter how you've necessarily lived up to this point. You are invited to do all the stuff that Psalm 98 is putting on the table. So that's what came to me as you were talking. Yeah.
Nice.
I think I hear yes to this. Yes to this. But orienting back to this, I think that can only you said that this is the reaction to that, but I think it only comes from that. It has to start with the reset. Because when I was looking over at Psalm 98 over Josh's shoulder, and I was like, okay, so this is a song of praise. This is like a normal, like, it feels like a lot of the other songs of praise. And I think the reason I get that way is because we have so many of them, and it's just praise. But having that reset of why we're doing it and what this means and where, like, the reset has to happen first for this to mean something. That's just my thing on it. Maybe I'm just cynical and like don't like songs of praise as much.
I'm with you there.
I feel like you need that reset for it to really draw me in, as you said, into it. So we're going to go to our last text of the day, which is John 1 through 14. Oh, he's already excited. So, so John 1, John 1 through 14. I'm going to take a lot of the same approach that Tess did, where there's so much of this that is just this. It's good, nice Christmas. This is the one. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's the part that everybody knows. That feels so standard, beautiful, very important. I'm going to skip it because that's super important and foundational to our faith, that like Jesus is a continuation of God's power. You can talk about that more if you like that. That's important, but that's not the thing that hit me this time. What I've never thought about is 10 and 11. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. And something about that hit me this year, different than it has been before. And this one, I wanted to have you on an episode because you've never been on an episode with me, and I was jealous. But also, the thing that it immediately made me think of is, like, where have you seen God recently? Where have you seen Jesus recently? Because I think there's a question of would we recognize? And so when I was going over this, I was like circling that over and over again, trying to figure out why we now understand it and why we didn't before. And it led me to the part in this that talks about John 6 through 8. It just randomly brings up John the Baptist, who is not brought up at this point in any of the other ones. John isn't born at this time. We're talking about creation, but we go to John. And I didn't know that we went to John because I had never read past the first part of this text and was going over that over and over again. And it led me to realize this year specifically, John hit me different because John has to happen for Jesus to happen. And like John played, to quote a fantastic movie that we all watched last night, The Last Temptation of Christ, Jesus had the easy job. He just had to be born. John had to have the role of not only identifying and being the person who is called to witness, but also to do something about it and to say something about it. And the commentary I was reading was talking about John's part in this, in the Christmas story, is our part. Kind of like what our last text was talking about, is to witness and what we do about it then. And so this all led me, this is my closing, I swear. This all led me to go and ask Derrick before we started filming. So Jesus is born, and then we have 30 years where there's no ministry. And you named specific verses. Do you remember which verses you read? Do you remember what verses you said?
I mean, I think his ministry starts at Mark chapter 1.
Mm-hmm. Do you know who's in Mark chapter 1? John the Baptist.
John the Baptist is in Mark chapter 1.
You listed one from each text, and all of them have John the Baptist either as the prophecy or being born at that time. And that, I don't know. I have no ending for this, because this is the only thing on my, like, I just been circling around this all day, is like our role as John the Baptist to witness for Christmas and what to do about it. But I've never cared about John the Baptist, but something this year is making me think about it more.
And I can vouch for this. When Sam came back outside after he had asked Derrick, he was like, Derrick said exactly what I needed him to say, and his mind was just blown.
All the verses you said have John.
He was like, I don't know.
They talk about John.
He literally said, I don't know what I would have talked about if Derrick hadn't told me what he told me, but he did, and so I'm good.
And so it all lined up.
There you go.
I got nothing else to add on it. There's something there. I want y'all to find it. I don't know what it is.
I'm a little speechless because I'm now blanking on all those verses that apparently I gave you. But
Matthew 3, Luke 1, Mark 1.
Yeah. Well, these are all of the nativity narrative, the nativity sections of the Gospels, and so, and what I did say was that, you know, depending on the Gospel writer, they're starting the nativity narrative at a very specific place for specific reasons. John starts the nativity narrative in creation itself. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Yeah. There's so many things there. I had not really thought about John the Baptist's role in inaugurating, acknowledging, ushering in Christmas, but he might be the Christmas character that we need to talk about more often. Because partly the verses that we have discussed today, we have discussed, particularly for the Christmas text, we have discussed how beautiful are the feet of them who preach the gospel of peace. When we watched The Last Temptation of Christ last night,
Fantastic movie.
John the Baptist, do you really think it's fantastic?
No.
Okay.
Oh, it's so
No.
good that I went to bed an hour early.
Yes.
So good that Josh stayed up because he was so pissed off.
Yes.
2 hours and 40 minutes of just
44 minutes.
minutes.
The ending is interesting.
Darn you, Martin Scorsese.
Look, it's Scorsese's.
The gospel according to Scorsese.
It's his. Okay.
The
But
fifth gospel.
John the Baptist in The Last Temptation is not at first glance beautiful in the ways that we mark beauty.
Mhm.
In fact, I don't know if anyone has ever depicted John the Baptist and then like gave us John the Baptist and said Isaiah 52. Yeah. How beautiful is this person here that is bringing this message? Like, and so again, Isaiah is like, you need to look at this person again. But again, the Hebrew preacher, right? Like, who is, I think John the Baptist is embodying the preacher. And in some respects, I think that if we really did some work, we would find that John the Baptist is probably saying the same things. I mean, we believe that the book of Hebrews has been written in the tradition of Paul. Maybe it's really written in the tradition of John the Baptist. Like, and so that would be an interesting sort of discovery. But even Psalm 98, like John the Baptist is calling us to worship. He's calling us to reset. And that's literally what he's doing. And so there is this beautiful thread of the text. And I could even see us thinking about the ways that we think about the shepherds and the ways that the world thought about John the Baptist. There's something there. And so this Christmas, I mean, I wonder if the gift of the lectionary this Christmas is an invitation to be inspired by this person, John. You know, what I wanted to do is talk about like John 1 more broadly, right? Like I wanted like the ways that John decides to start the nativity story in creation, pinging Genesis 1. I wanted to talk about the true light that it's into the world and the darkness has not overcome it. The word made flesh, and the way Eugene Peterson says it, and moved into the neighborhood. But you were like, no, I actually think we need to talk about the man that came from God, who wasn't the light, but he was the one that pointed to the light.
Well, even I want to say one last thing, and then I'm passing it on because I don't know how this part is supposed to end. But you said Tess's part, and then like didn't make the segue I thought you were going to. You said, Tess, at one point in your text, like, if Jesus is born in a manger, okay, like that's a baby born in a manger, that's a thing that happened. It doesn't matter until somebody bears witness to it. It doesn't matter until we get John. It's one of the I can't say that I can't claim that. One of the commentaries I was reading was talking about, like, is this an important story if nobody's there to witness it? And that's John. I don't know where this goes. Somebody else has to talk now. Yeah.
I just pinging off what you said about like the witnesses. It's really interesting to me, kind of tying it back to the very first passage about what Tess said about like it takes a village to raise a child, but for like Jesus' story, it takes a village of like misfits, dirty people, like every single person we point out today.
Dirty.
Well, the shepherds, right? Who spent all day. And like in the movie that we watched, John was, he was dirty. I think we can all agree on that. But it just seems like the village and the witnesses that God all included were not these higher up people. It was all people who were dirty people, who were common people who I think we can relate to another. So I just think that's interesting.
Sometimes Christmas is dirty.
Sometimes, according to Eliot, yeah.
I was trying to, like, you know what I mean?
That was correct.
I feel like it's time to land the plane.
Yeah, it is. It's most definitely time to land the plane.
That's our thank you guys. This has been my favorite episode so far. This is really fun. This is our ending. We're gonna go. I specifically requested that if Derrick was on this episode, he does closing prayer. So Derrick, are you ready? Can you sing your closing prayer?
I don't think I can sing.
Please sing us a hymn.
Sing us a song.
That's a great hymn. That's a great hymn. I'll pray and then we'll see what song emerges from there. Friends, let's pray together. Great God, we give you praise and thanks for the chance to open scripture together, to discuss it, to talk about the things that capture us, the things that confuse us, and just the space to say those things out loud in community. I thank you for the ways that your Spirit opens the scriptures to us so that we might see Jesus and that we might continue to be transformed to be the people you're calling us to be. And so even as we are celebrating Christmas, at least for this episode, we thank you, oh God, for sending Jesus. And we celebrate all that you are, God. We love you and we give you praise in Christ's name. Amen. And y'all, I don't have a song. I don't have a song.
You have no song in your heart?
Like,
are you gonna sing us out? Come on.
How like the Father, this thing called man, created in the image of the great I am. How like the Father, this thing called man, and I'm here to say I'm his biggest fan.
Oh my God.
That's from a show called Fallen Angel that I
Everybody
was a
knows.
part of about 20 years ago.
Find it on YouTube.
And-
Part 1 and part 2.
Yes, you can. Okay.
We'll link it in the bio. That was a perfect ending. And the only thing that I want to do, because we're all in person for the first time, is now we all say, bye guys. Bye.